The night was unusually quiet. The kind of silence that fills a house and presses down on your chest, making you aware of every creak and every distant hum. I had just finished a long day at work, and the bed felt like a sanctuary. It was one of those rare nights when I could afford to go to sleep early. But then, the shrill sound of the phone cut through the stillness. The call, unexpected as it was, sent a sharp chill through me. I let the phone ring for a second, thinking it might be a wrong number or a telemarketer. But as the second ring followed the first, a gut feeling took over. Something wasn't right. I reached out, heart pounding, and picked up the phone, holding it close to my ear.
Hello.
The voice on the other end was muffled, distant at first, but it cleared quickly.
Is this Linda?
The voice asked, and then the name of the hospital was mentioned. The instant they said it, my heart stopped. There was a sinking feeling in my chest, an instinctive recognition that this wasn't just a simple check-in.
We have your father here. He's had a stroke. We need you to come in right away.
The words hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. My father? I didn't process it immediately. I thought I had misheard. My father, strong and active, who still managed to chase me around the yard just a few months ago, who insisted on working long hours even in his 60s. No. It couldn't be. My thoughts raced in a blur, fragmented images flashing before my eyes. The last time I saw him, he had seemed tired, yes, but that was nothing out of the ordinary. Just stress, just age. Nothing more, right? But now, there was no more time to question. I shot out of bed, still in my pajamas, grabbed my car keys, and rushed out the door. The house, usually filled with the soft hum of the television or the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, felt eerily quiet. I stepped out into the night, my car waiting for me in the driveway, the headlights dim in the darkness. The road was empty, too empty. I drove faster than I should have, swerving slightly as I tried to shake off the panic creeping in. Each street lamp I passed seemed to throw harsh shadows, and the further I drove, the more disoriented I felt. The distance between my house and the hospital felt like a chasm I couldn't cross fast enough. With every minute that passed, the knot in my stomach tightened. I replayed every conversation I'd had with my father over the past few months, wondering if I had missed something, any indication that he was struggling. Was there something I could have done? Why hadn't I noticed? The streets outside the car window blurred. Every house, every tree, every sign I passed became part of a dream I couldn't wake up from. And yet, despite everything, my mind kept returning to the one undeniable fact: my father, the man who had always been there, invincible in my eyes, was suddenly, irrevocably vulnerable. Finally, the hospital loomed ahead. The cold, sterile building was like a looming giant in the night, its lights flickering like distant stars. I parked the car in the dimly lit lot, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The gravity of what I was about to face hit me full force. I opened the door and stepped out, my feet unsteady on the pavement. I wasn't ready for this. No one was ready for this. Inside the hospital, the air felt thick, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the undercurrent of panic. The front desk clerk barely looked up as I asked for my father. My breath was shallow, every second stretching longer than it should have. I was led down the hallway, the sound of footsteps echoing off the tiles. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in a dissonant hum, amplifying the unease in my chest. When I finally arrived at the intensive care unit, I stood frozen for a moment in the doorway. It was a scene I never imagined myself witnessing: the sterile white room, the quiet beep of machines that seemed to count time in a way I couldn't comprehend. And then there he was, lying in the bed. His face, once strong and filled with a quiet authority, was pale and almost unrecognizable. His hands, which had once been so full of energy, lay lifeless at his sides. The machines around him beeped in rhythm, calculating life in ways that seemed too clinical for such a personal, intimate moment. I wanted to run to him, to shake him awake, to demand that this nightmare be undone. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was as if the very air in the room was holding me back, suffocating me. I walked closer, my steps tentative, unsure whether I should touch him or just stay in the corner and watch. The uncertainty in the air was overwhelming. I stood there for what seemed like hours, just looking at him, wishing for some sign of the father I had known, the man who had been invincible. But all I could see was a man caught in a battle with his own body, with no guarantee that he would win. The silence in the room was suffocating. Time seemed to stop. The weight of everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen pressed down on me. And in that moment, I realized, this was a moment I could never undo. No matter what happened, I would never be the same after this. The shift from child to caregiver, from daughter to decision-maker, had begun. But none of that mattered as I stood there watching the fragile person who had been my father, who had once been the strongest force in my life, lying helpless before me. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as I entered the hospital. The sound of my footsteps echoed unnervingly against the tile floors. The waiting room stretched before me, an endless sea of soft, muted colors and uncomfortable plastic chairs. It looked like every other hospital waiting room, but to me, in that moment, it felt like a labyrinth, one that held answers I was too terrified to hear. I looked around, but the faces in the room blurred. Every person seemed to be in their own private world of anxiety, fear, and waiting, their lives paused in the same way mine had been. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, their artificial brightness casting an eerie glow over everything. There was no warmth in the room, just coldness that seeped into my skin, making the whole space feel more alien with each passing second. I found an empty chair in the far corner, far away from the others. I didn't want to engage with anyone. I didn't want to hear their stories, didn't want to be reminded that everyone here had their own crisis. Everyone here was hurting, just like me. But that's what hospitals do, they draw you into their rhythm, make you feel the weight of human suffering in a way that's impossible to ignore. I sat down, but I couldn't keep still. My hands shook as I clutched my purse, and my thoughts spiraled. What were the doctors doing to my father? Was he fighting? Was he scared? I thought of the last time I had seen him, strong, confident, cracking jokes as he helped me with my car's engine. I couldn't reconcile that image with the image of him lying helpless in a hospital bed. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario, each one worse than the last. Minutes stretched into hours. I couldn't tell time anymore. The clock on the wall seemed to mock me, its second hand ticking relentlessly, dragging the moment on, as though time itself was in no hurry to give me answers. I felt like I was living in a movie, one where the protagonist has no idea what happens next, no control over the unfolding plot. My mind kept returning to my father. I could see his face so clearly, the way his brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, the smile that could light up a room. I imagined him in his hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to even lift a finger. It was as if the man I had known had been swallowed by the bed, by the machines keeping him alive, by the cruel reality that health could slip away in an instant. The door to the hallway opened, and a nurse walked through, her face a mask of professionalism. She was followed by another, then another. Each one passed without a glance in my direction, but there was something in their eyes, the flicker of recognition, of knowing just how dire the situation was. They were too experienced to give false hope, too jaded to pretend that everything would be fine. And then, as if the weight of the world had shifted just a little, a family of 4 entered the room. Their appearance was like a flash of light in an otherwise darkened space. The mother, a woman in her mid-40s, had a look of quiet devastation in her eyes, but there was a stoic determination in her posture as she led her children into the room. They didn't speak, but I could feel the tension between them, the fear hanging in the air. The father, older, with a beard tinged with gray, sat next to me, his face hard with worry. The silence in the room was punctuated by the soft sound of distant footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional beeping of medical equipment just beyond the walls. But amidst all the silence, there was the sound of quiet, controlled sobs, coming from the family across the room. The mother, who had tried so hard to hold it together, finally let the tears slip, her hands pressed over her mouth as her shoulders trembled. Her children, barely teenagers, clung to each other, their faces streaked with fear and confusion. I didn't know their story, but in that moment, it didn't matter. It was as if the collective weight of all our fears and hopes had merged into a single, heavy breath. The reality of what we were all facing settled over the room like a dense fog, wrapping around each of us in our own private prisons of grief. Suddenly, the door opened again, and a doctor stepped in. The room seemed to hold its breath. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was enough to make every heart skip a beat. He looked at the nurse who had let him in, nodded, and then turned his attention to the waiting families. He didn't address us directly, but his glance swept over the room, acknowledging the silent desperation in the air. I could feel my pulse quicken, my heart racing, as I waited for the information I so desperately needed. But the doctor's eyes didn't settle on me. Instead, he walked over to the desk, speaking to the receptionist in hushed tones. The woman behind the desk nodded, her face an unreadable mask. I strained to catch every word, every shift of their bodies. Was my father getting worse? Was something changing? I wanted to leap to my feet and demand answers, but I couldn't. There was something suffocating about the space, about the knowledge that nothing was in my control. I stood up suddenly, unable to stay still any longer. The air was thick, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I stepped into the hallway, my shoes echoing in the quiet corridor. The dim lighting, the cold tile, the smell of antiseptic, everything felt so foreign, so surreal. I was lost in a haze of fear and frustration, my mind spiraling out of control. A nurse passed me, walking with purpose, but I stopped her, catching her by the arm. My voice shook as I asked for an update.
"How is he?"
I whispered, the words heavy on my tongue. She paused, looking at me with compassion but little else.
"We're doing everything we can. He's stable for now."
Her words were carefully measured, and they offered nothing of substance. I had no idea whether this meant he was improving, holding steady, or if they were just trying to soften the blow. I nodded, too stunned to speak. As she walked away, I felt the weight of those few words press down on me. Stable. But for how long? Could I prepare myself for what was next? Could I prepare myself for the worst? The silence in the waiting room felt even more deafening now. I went back to my seat, but I didn't sit. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark night, trying to make sense of it all. I had never felt so powerless, so small. It was as though the world outside had continued without me, oblivious to the chaos that was consuming my life, and yet, I couldn't seem to escape it. The night was growing colder, the moments dragging on. And in that waiting room, amidst the quiet grief, I couldn't help but wonder, how long would we all be waiting for the same thing, the outcome that would shape the rest of our lives? The following morning dragged like molasses. It felt like the entire world had slowed down, like time itself had been caught in the same anxious web I was trapped in. I couldn't escape the feeling that something enormous, something irreversible, was unfolding, and yet, I had no way of knowing what would happen next. I was sitting in the same cold, bright waiting room when the doctor finally appeared. He wasn't the same one who had spoken to me the night before, but I recognized the sharp, focused look in his eyes. He was here to deliver news. The kind of news no one wanted to hear.
Are you Linda?
He asked, scanning a clipboard before looking up to make direct eye contact. His voice was steady, almost too steady. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't wasting time either.
Yes. I replied, my throat dry, my voice barely more than a whisper. The doctor nodded and motioned for me to follow him. He led me down a long corridor that smelled of antiseptic and faintly of bleach, the smell so intense I could taste it. We reached a small office, where he gestured for me to sit. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my hands were clammy as I gripped the edge of the chair. I tried to steady my breathing, but the walls felt like they were closing in.
Your father had a severe stroke.
The doctor began.
It was quite massive, affecting both sides of his brain. He was lucky to even make it this far, but...
He paused, glancing down at the file in his hand, then back at me.
The damage is extensive. He is in critical condition.
The words hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't prepared for this kind of certainty, for the cold weight of medical language that stripped away all hope. Critical condition. That wasn't just a label, it was a death sentence, a warning that time was running out. I sat frozen, as though the room itself had become a vacuum, sucking all the air out of my lungs. I could feel my chest tightening, my thoughts spinning wildly. This can't be happening. The doctor continued, explaining the details of my father's condition, how parts of his brain were no longer functioning, how he was unable to move on his own, how there was no guarantee he would ever regain the ability to speak or even recognize people. Every word he spoke seemed to chip away at the foundation of everything I had known, replacing it with an overwhelming fear I couldn't control. What are the options? I asked, the words rasping from my throat. I didn't want to hear the answer, but I had to. I needed to understand what kind of future we were facing, if any. The doctor hesitated, his face softening for a fraction of a second.
There's a chance of recovery, but it would be a long and difficult road. Even then, the prognosis is uncertain. He may regain some functionality, or he may be left with significant disabilities. The decision now is whether or not to proceed with further treatment or comfort care.
His words blurred together, becoming a fog of medical jargon that I couldn't quite process. Comfort care. The phrase seemed so detached, so cold, when compared to the man who had been my father, strong, capable, never asking for anything. The thought that he might never be the same, that I might never see him as the person I remembered, was suffocating. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I needed space. I needed air. The walls of the small office felt like they were closing in. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this information. I couldn't make sense of it. The options felt like a cruel game, no matter which path I chose, I was losing something precious. Can I see him? I asked, my voice tight, almost breaking. I didn't want to break down in front of this doctor, in front of anyone. But the tremble in my voice was betraying me.
Of course,
he said, his tone neutral but sympathetic. He opened the door, and I followed him down another hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. I was acutely aware of the sounds around me, the click of nurses' shoes on the floor, the soft hum of machines, and yet, everything felt so far away. I was moving in a fog, as if someone else was controlling my body, forcing me forward when all I wanted was to turn back, to pretend none of this was real. When we reached my father's room, I stood in the doorway for a long moment.